Okay, so this is the actually the fourth lesson, but we're still on number 3 for the elements of style. Home lessons, okay, enclose parenthetic expressions between commas. Now last week we talked about how basically what that meant is when you have a sentence that has an interruption in it, right? I think the one we used, my brother, you will be pleased to hear, is in perfect health, right? You put commas around you will be pleased to hear because that was considered a parenthetic expression, right? It added info to the sentence, okay? And basically what we said last week was you can do it by feel, which is what this sentence is saying. If the interruption of the flow of the sentence is minimal, meaning short, you may safely omit the commas, right? So it's almost just like, okay, let me listen to the sentence. If the interruption isn't very big, then it probably doesn't need commas. If it sounds like a big interruption, right? If the flow of the sentence is interrupted for quite a while, then I do need commas. So the example we gave again was, my brother, interruption, you will be pleased to hear, is in perfect health, right? Is in perfect health is back to the flow of the sentence. So it was a big interruption, so we put commas around it, okay? Now, that was just sort of based off of feel, right? Okay? Today I want to talk a little bit about sort of the more scientific way of understanding this idea, okay? And determining whether an expression needs commas, okay? And it comes down to these two words, restrictive versus non-restrictive, which is kind of confusing. So, to make it more simple, we could say, is it a necessary part of the sentence? Or is it unnecessary? Okay, they're pretty much the same idea. Okay, so again, the question comes down to, are we adding information that's not necessary to the sentence? If that's the case, put commas around it. If the information is necessary, then you don't put commas. Okay, so necessary means no commas. Okay, unnecessary means yes, commas, right? And usually 2, depending on where it is in the sentence. Okay, so let's look at an example of this. Okay, and I'll just read it first, and then we'll write it down. Okay, so the audience, which had at first been bored, became interested. Okay, the audience, which had at first been bored, became interested. So hopefully you can hear the flow of it there, right? The audience, what I'll do is just do it like this to make it even more simple, right? The basic skeleton of the sentence, right, the subject and the verb, basically, the audience became interested, right? Now, the expression that I added, which had at first been bored, right? Because that extra information is such a big interruption, okay? Because it's actually unnecessary to the sentence, you could still have the audience became interested, right? I'm going to put commas around it, okay? Now you compare that with a sentence like this, okay? People, this is a sort of a proverb, which is maybe one you've heard before, okay? But it's also a good example of the concept we're talking about, okay? People in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Okay, or what would be the better way to say that? People who live in glass houses? Yeah. So let's see. People who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. So what would be the interruption here, right? What are you trying to determine whether you should use commas for? Okay, people who live, right? Basically, it's this whole clause. Okay, right? People who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Okay, so what I'm asking you to determine is whether or not that's necessary to the meaning of the sentence or unnecessary to the meaning of the sentence. Okay, so if you take out this clause, people shouldn't throw stones, well, technically the sentence makes sense, right? People shouldn't throw stones. Okay, right? But the meaning of the sentence is lost, right? So it's necessary. Okay, the meaning of the sentence is this proverb: if you live in a glass house, right, you shouldn't throw stones because somebody could throw them at your house, right? Like, if you have this issue, don't accuse others of having this issue when you yourself have that problem. It's basically what the proverb is saying, right? So if you take out this clause, it doesn't make sense anymore in the true meaning of the proverb. Okay? So for that reason, you're not going to use commas. Okay? If it's essential to the sentence, then you don't need commas. If it's not essential to the sentence, you do need commas. Okay? So that's basically what we're talking about when we say, again, restrictive versus non-restrictive, and necessary versus unnecessary. Okay, I'll write these up here. Again, necessary, or you could even say essential to the sentence. Okay, then no commas. Okay, if it's unnecessary, if it's just adding information, or you could say non-essential, then you have to use commas. Yes, commas. Okay. So back to our examples there, right? Or the one example, people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Who live in glass houses shouldn't have commas around it because it is essential to the meaning of the sentence. Okay? And then that first one we looked at, which used commas, right, was the audience, which had at first been bored, became interested. Which had at first been bored adds information. You need commas there. Okay. So, back to this rule: enclose parenthetic expressions between commas. Parenthetic, also known as non-restrictive, unnecessary, non-essential parts of the sentence that just add information.